haven't done a good old ranting in quite a while, so let's shred affirmative action, shall we? Apparently, according to this gentleman over here, a one Richard Samuelson, who's an associate's professor, I do believe, has made the claim that affirmative action will soon be struck down by the Supreme Court, and we can only hope because it's a barrel of arse. As I'm sure many of you are well aware, just to give a TLDR, affirmative action is basically an older version of the diversity bollocks, or as I like to call it, shit and sherbet, or SS for short. But anyway, apparently the great demographic change that has taken place since the 1960s over there in Yankee Land has resulted in unforeseen consequences. Who'd have thought? Citing from the article, this demographic change is making our post-Jim Crow civil rights enforcement scheme unworkable. I wonder why. Passage and enforcement of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was an effort to end the tyranny of Jim Crow. Technically, the law made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, skin color, same thing, isn't it? Religion, sex, and national origin in most public and private domains, such as voter registration, employment, and public accommodation. All right. Let's be real here for a moment, shall we? Is there a universal code of conduct for the Western world? Yes, there is. The concept of racial equality is a pipe dream that will never ever come to fruition. You have disparities between groups of the same race on the same continent, for heaven's sakes. So mixing them across continents, they don't dissipate. They're still there. And so you have different cultural disparities. There are positive qualifications and there are negative qualifications. And different races and different cultures have a disparate mix of the positive and negative qualifications. And so, naturally, the recognition and adherence to those who harbor more of the positive qualifications will be rewarded, manifesting itself in the stupid thing we call discrimination, or as we call it in the real world, where PC speak is obsolete and a complete load of bollocks, cultural superiority. But anyway, back to the article. Thanks in part to our demographic revolution, this approach is increasingly rife with contradictions. Again, I wonder why. The lawsuit against affirmative action at elite private and public institutions is on the docket because its plaintiffs are Asian Americans, a protected class. From the perspective of elite university admissions officers, Asian students overperform and thus make it hard to admit the number of non-Asian, non-white applicants the schools would like to admit, without affirmatively favoring their candidacy on the basis of their protected status. Kenny Zhu, writing in The Spectator, notes that an Asian American student must score 450 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a black student with the otherwise same qualifications. In other words, affirmative action pits protected classes against each other. Yeah, it's almost like it's the real world. This, to me, is a prime example of why I freaking detest politics. Thomas Sowell's saying there's no such thing as solutions, what you have are trade-offs. Perfect example. And here is a trade-off of you being stupid, with your soft bigotry of low expectations manifesting itself in your dim-witted desire to level the playing field in terms of racial quotas. Now you just created a situation where you have a lower-tier group of blacks next to a hyper-concentration of the finest Asians. Brilliant! And then people go, why do Asians perform so well? I don't know. Maybe it's because, thanks to your short-sighted stupidity to eliminate a racial disparity, you ended up pitting the lowest-scoring blacks against the creme de la creme of the already highest-performing groups, that is Asians, not only creating the widest possible performance disparity you can muster, but also further exacerbating the existing disparities based on the performance one. One of which is making education more valuable on the basis of race, because if Asians have a higher entry requirement, you're further reinforcing the stereotype that they are in fact smarter. Oh, Lord, we're surrounded by idiots. And the last thing I'll address, and this is possibly the stupidest thing you will ever come across when it comes to this bollocks, which is the concept around BIPOCs, black, indigenous, people of color, model minority, all of that sort of rubbish. Not really a fan of that phrase, model minority. Makes no sense. Especially over in America, if you're trying to strive for cultural assimilation. Shouldn't be model minority. Use model citizen. That's more appropriate. This is sort of playing off the article in the Vice stream. The very concept that you can take a bunch of different races and cultures across continents, mind you, and once they reach the shores of America, that the enemy of the enemy is my friend distinction with regards to whites will instantaneously kick in, and a bunch of minorities will somehow magically align and band together purely on the basis of lower numerical count is one of the dumbest things I can possibly imagine. The idea that race alone would supersede all other metrics of social cohesion is pure insanity. And I can speak of this personally, mind you. I'm a foreigner where I live. I was born in South Africa and I moved to Europe. I went to school in Europe. I had other South Africans in my year. I didn't get along with them just because they're also South African. What made me dislike them here would also make me dislike them back home. Secondly, and again, let's be real here for a moment, a conservative culture is more conducive to success, period, regardless of where in the world you go. That is a universal truth. So you have places in the world that are more culturally conservative, parts of Asia and Northern Africa, for example. People from these regions go to America and outperform the majority white population. Why do you think that is? These are places where there is virtually no white people. And then they go to America, behave in the exact same way as where they came from, and a bunch of white liberals and co will tell them, "Oh, you've adopted the ways of white supremacy." Motherfucker, I come from a country where there is no white people. Who the hell is buying this stupid shit? This is why representation is such nonsense. Whites have been represented by other whites for all of American history, and you still have poor and wealthy whites. Hell, you go to any country with a majority and you're going to find the exact same thing. Why is it, for example, that Jews were able to amass such a reputation and wealth prior to them having any representation or wealth in the former half of the last century, when most of the representation in government was overwhelmingly Irish? Why is it that blacks were amassing a greater wealth and college admission rates prior to the introduction of the welfare state? Ooh, touchy subject there. Why is it, despite having little to no representation in the political apparatus, Asians outperform whites in terms of test scores and family income? All evidence points to the fact that representation doesn't mean jack shit. Imagine being so stupid to think that purely on skin color alone, someone who looks like you is going to give a damn about what you think or care about what you have to say about anything, just because there's more of the other around. What a bunch of bollocks. And that is all for today. Thank you all for watching, and my lord, we are surrounded by idiots.